Hello all. I'm so excited that you could be joining me today for my presentation on Roadmap to Creating Meaningful Watershed Experiences. I truly do wish that this was in person, but given the circumstances, we will work with what we got. My name is Kat Cushway, and today I'll be talking to you about how I created meaningful watershed experiences for my students this past year. Little introduction. I teach at Coopersville Middle School, and this will be my second year there. I previously taught in GRPS, and I spent a little time in Texas as well as a short little stint at Grand Rapids Public Zoo School, which was an amazing experience. This year I had two different classes. I had sixth grade science, but I also had an elective environmental science course, which is where I would be pulling all the experiences from. I had 60 students, which ranged from 6th grade to 8th grade. So I actually had 11-year-olds in my classes all the way up to 14, which has been a challenge, but an awesome experience in itself. And this class only took place in the fall semester. So here you can see that I have my one class here. This is my 3rd hour class, and we were all at the pond, the beautiful outdoor classroom that was created just a couple years ago. A few objectives for this presentation. I'm going to show you a few different things, and I am a visual learner, and I don't like a lot of words. I like more pictures and examples. So that is what you will be getting from me today, is lots of examples, lots of things and resources that you can pull from. And throughout this whole entire presentation, please be writing your questions down, and I will be available for a question and answer section later this afternoon. So first, we're going to talk about how to create these experiences. Second, we're going to talk about how to support them. Third, how to learn about more opportunities and more experiences. And then the last part is how I personally, or Groundswell personally, can support you in teaching these watershed experiences. So for curriculum, I used many different resources from a lot of different curriculum, but the majority of the curriculum was self-created and self-developed. So I use resources from different curriculum like Project Wet, Project Learning Tree, Project Wild. I pulled many resources from Groundswell, from what Groundswell has to offer, as well as talking with a lot of different teachers who have been doing this for many of years, and pulling different procedures and routines from either some of my other PD that I've had in the past. I focused on the connection of 3 main ecosystems that were very specific to Michigan, which is how I've developed my curriculum and how I put it all together. So in here, I really stayed broad and shallow instead of hyper-focused and deep into one particular subject, which really allowed for student choice and exploration. You will hear me say student choice all the time throughout this presentation, because that is what I truly believe makes these meaningful watershed experiences. So we focus on the lower Grand River watershed, which is where Coopersville what watershed Coopersville is part of, the Great Lakes ecosystem and the forest ecosystem. And a little plug as well, I'm currently in the process of getting curriculum that I've developed copyrighted and published, so please stay tuned for details there. There's a plethora of resources that I would love to share with you. So create. How do we create meaningful experiences for our students? So how I view this first part is from 4 different things. So teamwork, watershed information, routines and procedures, and water issues. And how I place them on the pie chart is how I prioritize them in my classroom. As you see, teamwork is huge, and so are routines and procedures. The watershed information and water issues, those are an amazing addition that adds complexity to routines and procedures and to teamwork. That is kind of like the yummy sauce that's on like a good, taco or a good meat and potatoes, right? That's all the good stuff, but you need to have that foundation of teamwork and routines and procedures first. A few examples of what this looks like. So in the very beginning of school, we go over groups and classroom norms. These are done in groups, and I do this as a full class. Sometimes I use whiteboards. classroom routines and procedures. Sometimes I do scavenger hunts. Other times we talk about them together as a class. I walk them through it, mainly just allowing them to really be part of it and be part of creating these groups and classroom norms and classroom procedures and routines, and really having them invest their own thoughts into this beginning part. I then set up crews as well, which we're going to talk about more in detail later. We have individual roles within that crew. So a lot of you probably already do this with your groups. You have someone in charge of this, someone in charge of this, and someone in charge of this. And that's how I run all of my groups. I combine Watershed, education, and teamwork. So for an example, I do an introduction to Watershed, and then as an activity after that introduction, I have them build a watershed. And they are always working in groups when it comes to doing the activities that I have placed into my PowerPoints, I have placed into my presentations, especially when I'm giving them information. We all know what it's like to sit in a conference or sit in a staff meeting and hear someone talk for 45 minutes to an hour. Sometimes we check out, but by really placing different activities and placing movement within those presentations, that provides opportunities for participation. So here's some examples and some proof, I guess you would see some evidence of this. So the lab team roles that I have within each of the teams is a director, materials manager, facilitator, technician, and participant. Once I get to talking about what our pond time looks like, these are vital to each group. On the bottom picture, you will see that there is a group of students that are working on their watershed model. And then on the upper right, that is the students working on our group norms and brainstorming what they believe should be in the norms as a classroom. This also creates a culture. That's another piece that I think is so very important when creating meaningful watershed experiences, is creating a good culture where your students trust each other, but they also trust you and you can trust your students. Next step, outdoor field activities. Keep it simple, get outside. When I first started getting my students outside, it was very, very, very intimidating. I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know the procedures and the policies that my school had in place, and I was really lost. But a great teacher mentor told me, you need to have 2 different goals and just make 2 goals. And if you hit those goals, great. My one goal for this year was to get my students outside. If I got them outside, I could feel accomplished. So keep it simple and just get them outside. But I'm going to dive into this a little bit and tell you some things of how you can do that. So easier said than done. There are challenges and there are logistics that I personally ran into when getting my students outside. So we're going to explore both of those, all the challenges and the logistics as well. The main thing for the challenges is just adapting and just doing your best to get them outside, no matter what that looks like. For logistics, always communicate and plan ahead. Your building administrators will really appreciate this, as well as your parents and the students. So for challenges, transportation was huge for us. Where will you go? When will you go? How will you get there? So for the activities I had set up, I wanted to go to the community pond, which is on the other side of our campus, but it was a 30-minute walk round trip for both of my classes. So I also had to teach a class in between. So I had an environmental science, I had a 6th grade science, and environmental science. So this created a huge challenge when wanting to go to the pond. So what I had to do is I contacted our transportation department prior to the school year, and I had to schedule these pond visits. But one of the hours fell over the elementary route, so we had to walk back. So what I had to do is I had to make sure that my students were prepared. Every single time we went, before we were going to the pond, they knew exactly when we were going, where we were going, and what they were going to do once they get there. Well, they also knew, and I was very transparent, that they knew that we were on a time crunch. So there was no goofing off. All the expectations were set very clear, because we only had 50 minutes to get to the pond, do what we had to do, and get back. So I definitely encourage, as if you have a similar situation, talk to your transportation department, talk to your building administrators. I truly believe that they will be able to do whatever you need them to do, and they will be able to make it work. Behavior. Middle schoolers and students in general, they're not always going to be on their best behavior. We know that. So how do you address it? How do you plan for it? What are the expectations? So setting expectations and practicing procedures weeks prior to going to the pond for me was absolutely vital. Having students and parents sign an agreement prior to going to the pond was also helpful. That way, if behavior ever needed to be addressed, we could look back at that contract and say, hey, this is what you agreed to. This is what your parents agreed to. Now we're going to have an issue, and we're going to deal with that issue the best that we can. Having red lines, just like you do in the classroom, was also very useful in laying out what the consequences were going to be, along with the support of your admin team. So for an example, if my students ever went into, so we had a stream that was next to our pond, and that's actually what we were doing all our testing in, was the stream, which is very shallow. The pond was 8 foot of muck, no lie. So I did not want anyone going in the pond. So they knew that a red line for me was going into the pond, especially without permission. Sometimes we do some testing, but I would choose certain students for that, and they would know how to do that. So they knew if you go on the pond, you're done. You're not going to be coming to the pond. You're going to have to earn your way back so I can trust you again to come back to the pond. Now, this may seem a little harsh, but I really believe that you need to set clear expectations and clear consequences that make sense in order for this to work and work well. A lot of times, I think even us as adults, we just want to know what's expected of us. And most of the time when we know what's expected of us, we often perform better. I really believe that the same goes to the students. 99.5% of the time, my students did an amazing job. Even those students that I was kind of concerned about and that really didn't behave well in the classroom, they thrived outside. So that's another thing just to keep in the back of your mind, is that most of the time, the kids are going to do what is expected of them, especially when they're outside, because they love it. They don't want to wreck that chance. They love going to the pond. Weather. This one is nearly impossible to plan for, especially in the fall. It helped to contact admin team early, way early, in order to come up with a plan on what the policy is as far as when can I take my kids outside, what's the policy on thunderstorms, rain, lightning, all that type of thing. So I had one day where it was sprinkling a little bit. I took my one class out, but big storms were rolling out for the second class. So I had to cancel the pond trip for the second class. They were super upset about it, but they understood why. And then it ended up being sunny, but we had already canceled our bus. So sometimes you just really have to just accept the issue, accept the challenge, and overcome it. Also talk to your admin team about what you're going to do for makeup days. I guarantee if you go outside with your students the same time every single week, they will be expecting it, they will anticipate it, and they will love it. So they will not want to miss it. You will also notice that when you do have that plan, attendance, you'll have all your students there on those days, almost guaranteed. Also, ask the students to be prepared. I had a set of rubber boots for every single student in my classroom, and I'll talk about supplies later and how I made that happen. And I told them, you have to prepare for rain or shine. And for the most part, they did a really good job with that. Logistics. So, time. Time is the biggest thing, and as teachers, you guys know that. At CMS, we had 50-minute blocks. So after practicing each set of tests for each crew, we knew we needed at least a half hour to complete the water quality test, surveys, and assessments. I knew that we needed 5 minutes to gather supplies, take attendance, and load the bus. We knew that we needed 5 minutes to get back. We needed 5 minutes to get to the pond and back, which didn't leave us really a lot of room for accidental issues or late students or any type of issues that may happen within a group or when you're taking 30 kids outside at a time, especially across campus. So what we did was each group has a timekeeper, and they kept track of time and moved the group along with their procedures. They also, a huge part of all this is keeping in communication with your colleagues, making sure everyone in the building knows when you're going to the pond, They knew that every Wednesday, Mrs. Cushway was taking her kids outside. So a couple times I had it where we were 2 minutes late. It was after the bell. All my kids would have been tardy. I sent out an email, and everyone was very gracious, and they knew, all right, it's not going to happen every day. We can give her some grace. And then we just kind of adapted from there. So I gave myself more time for the one class, knowing they'd be a little bit slower. So time is a huge logistic that you have to think about and really, really nail down. How much time do you have? How much time do you need? And how do you keep track of that time? Volunteers is another big deal. 30 kids by yourself taking to a body of water is quite nerve-wracking and kind of a big deal. So I knew it was a lot to supervise 30 students by myself, especially when my crews, which that's my groups of students, I call them crews, were spread apart and we were dealing with water. I asked parents in the beginning of the year if they'd be willing to volunteer, and each week I actually had parents sign up for a slot. So I knew I had another adult to supervise at all times. Also, you have to talk to your secretary, talk to your admin team about, do they need background checks? So my school, every single volunteer that came on campus needed a background check. So I had to make sure that I had that all in line. I had a spreadsheet of who had background checks, who didn't, who needed them. And then I also found a way to organize the volunteers. So for me, all I did was send out a spreadsheet. I had parents sign up. So we were all under one Google Doc and we all knew who was going to the pond and when. Equipment. So that is another huge thing, especially if you're thinking about doing any water quality testing. If you're doing any bird watching, things like that, we all need equipment. And as we know, the funding for that equipment can be kind of hard to find. So in the beginning of the year, when I was processing how to teach this class, what I would teach, how I would teach it, and I had a lot of flexibility in that way, which I was very thankful for, I'd ask myself, what equipment do I need? What equipment do I have? And how will I get that additional equipment? So I made a list, and Jessica Vander Ark from Groundswell, she helped me go through that list, and I would be more than happy to go through a list of equipment that I have, and a list of equipment with you if you are like, hey, Kat, like I have no idea what I need and what is important. I can totally go through and I can show you my list of what I thought was really important for what we were doing. So just to let you know, I was fortunate enough to have a set budget from my school that I was able to spend on equipment. So I was able to use that money in whatever way I saw fit, which I know in some school districts that just isn't possible. I was very fortunate for that. But Groundswell is huge for that, for grants, and you can find other organizations that you can write grants for, and you can totally use that money in order to buy equipment for your water quality testing or any outdoor supplies that you need. As far as like what I needed, I talked about how I met with Jessica, but I also met with other people, and I attended quite a bit of PD over that 1 year once I found out I was going to be teaching this class. And similar to doing like a registry, you talk to everybody and you figure out what you need and what is essential and what isn't needed. And so I did that the same with local teachers in the area. So some activities that you can be doing outside and that don't take a lot of time or a lot of practice are things like scavenger hunts, nature journaling, leaf collections, water quality testing, which I'm going to talk a lot about later, site assessments, bird watching, weather tracking, and a water walk. So I take my kids on the first day of school and we do a scavenger hunt with pipe cleaners, which reinforces their nature skills. So for an example, this is how you listen. This is how you walk outside. You don't talk with your neighbor when you're going outside. You're journaling things. You're writing your observations. So teaching them and creating a habit for them. Nature journaling is a great way to address differentiation and gets your students in the habit of always bringing their journal with them every time you go out in the field, and how important that is to mark down their observations. Leaf collections was a great way that actually got families really involved with the kids' projects. I had grandparents working on it with them. I had parents. I had older siblings. It was amazing to see what some of these kids came up with when they did these leaf collections. Also, I used these leaf collections to also connect water and forestry, and which also promoted student choice. So I'd give them a list of requirements, but as long as they met those requirements, the project was theirs. Water quality testing, which I'm going to talk a lot about next slide. Site assessments, which included walking the property using compasses and maps, which help create a common language when talking later about different parts of the campus. So we're going to go over by the basketball court, or we're going to go over by the pond, or we're going to go over to Mr. So-and-so's field. It just created that common language. Bird watching. I included binoculars and bird identification books into my equipment costs. So students would buddy up and we would walk around campus paying attention to the birds. This is always just a fun one. If I didn't have much planned for that day and we're like, hey, we're going for bird watching, or hey, I saw sandhill cranes on my way in, let's go see if they're still there. It really gives you some flexibility. Weather tracking. We didn't do a ton of this year, but I would like to be more consistent with journaling weather and paying attention to how precipitation affects Watershed. So that's another thing. And if anyone does that, I would love to hear your input from how you do that and what goes well. And then the last one, water walk. This is how I reinforce the watershed information. So we took the time to look at where the culverts, streams, and drainage were, and which really allowed us to use our vocabulary and terminology and have conversation about where water comes from and where water goes throughout the campus. Water quality tests. I ran my water quality tests in rotations. So what I did is I split my crews up, and there was a purple crew, an orange crew, green crew, black crew, and a blue crew. And they were in those groups for the full entire 6 weeks that we were going to the pond. So I would start one crew at general stream, and there would be a box of their equipment. There would be instructions and all the information they needed to learn in order to reach the requirements and learn how to do what they were doing. Riparian survey. This was another, it was more assessment and survey and looking at what percentage of the stream was boulders, what percentage was cobble, what percentage was sand, and they really did a good job with surveying the land. Water quality 1 was dissolved oxygen. Water quality 2 was taking pH and temperature. So these crews were specifically looking at water samples and comparing water samples week to week. And then aquatic invertebrates, which worked on invertebrate identification, as well as what different invertebrates are telling us about the pollution in the water. So then what we would do is every Tuesday, we would practice for the whole entire hour. And they would go through their group roles, they would go through what they need to do and what was expected of them the next day at the pond. Then every Wednesday, we would go to the pond and they would do what was required of them. So having that whole prep day was really, really vital. And I would absolutely recommend that to anyone who would like to do something like this. And then allowing yourself to be that person that checks in with each group, which is really, really helpful. And just being there and walking around and allowing them to really teach each other and learn on their own. Also giving them the flexibility and the space to learn from each other, but also to allow themselves that freedom to guide their group how they would like to guide it. Routines and procedures. This is huge. These are routines and procedures that we are reinforcing every single time they're working with a group. Every single time they are focusing on one of their procedures, if it be water quality, if it be identifying aquatic invertebrates, routines and procedures. Students will say that those are my 2 favorite words when it comes to classroom. So here's some evidence of my students getting out there and experiencing their watershed, their meaningful watershed experiences. They really had a great time, and I had a ton of amazing feedback from students when it came to going to the pond. So exciting news, students can make a difference and can work hard to increase knowledge and awareness of environmental issues. So we did some stewardship action projects throughout the year. Student choice was the most important concept when choosing and completing this project. student choice, allow them to do what they're passionate about. Pet waste stations. My students decided that pet waste stations were something that we needed on campus. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we are unable to complete this construction, but it will be completed this fall, which we're very excited about. And this was all student-led. They were the ones to brainstorm what they look like. They were the ones to lead the projects. Here's a couple examples of invasive species infographics these are what my students created, a few of them. And once they created them, we actually then gave them to local nature centers and local parks, and they were hung up around town, which is really cool. And it really created that buy-in for students that they were doing something that matters and they were doing something that their community will see. So analyzing and sharing results, I think this is a huge part of buy-in when it comes to student choice and student projects. So there's a few different ways that this can happen, and I have done all 4 of these ways, and I use them frequently throughout my classroom time. So digital platform that gets done with the student body, presentations where they are in front of an authentic panel, gallery walks so their peers can actually see their work, and then showcase. So maybe you have the ability to set aside a night to do a community showcase. If you do, I highly suggest it. The parents love it, the community loves it, and the students really step up. So here's some evidence of our showcase tonight. As you can see, we have our table set up. We even had a fish wall that one of the groups set up in the top corner. We had some talk about E. coli. We had aquatic invertebrates. Now for the showcase night, what happened was the students, I sent out a survey, and there was a survey of all the topics that we've learned about, every single topic. Everything from learning about the Great Lakes fish to aquatic invertebrates to E. coli, all the way to leaf collections, pet waste stations, watershed information, how to find out how old a tree is, and looking at tree rings. So what the students did is they actually formed their own groups based on what they wanted to dive deeper into and what they wanted to present to their community. So what they were in charge of is they chose a topic and they had to research it using the information I gave them from throughout the year, as well as what they knew from throughout the year and what additional research they needed to do. Then they had to come up with some type of evidence, some type of something that the participants of the showcase night could take with them, as well as some type of trifold or poster, or as you can see, fish wall, that shows everyone what they are going to be learning about. This was the most amazing experience. It was very nerve-wracking, but overall, the students did an amazing job. So to support, how do you support your students in these meaningful watershed experiences? So many different things. So your participation throughout all of this is going to include check-ins, feedback, communication, being visible, improvisation. You're going to have to improvise all of the time, and the relationships with your students. This one is huge. Your students need to trust you and you need to trust them. Integration in classroom curriculum. So investigation, responsibility, modeling, and systems. These are all words that we are all very, very familiar with, and it is vital to creating these meaningful watershed experiences for your students. So allowing students to explore and constantly ask them why. So they would get so annoyed with me because I would always ask them why, and I would ask them to show me their thoughts. They hated that phrase. They hated it. But at the end, I hope they realized what I was trying to do. Demonstrating and showing them how before expecting them to master it themselves. So if I was asking them to build a watershed model, I would model a small one first so they would kind of have a little bit of an idea. And then I would obviously add on additional things that I needed them to do so they couldn't just copy me. Responsibility, making the information relevant, encouraging students to take responsibilities. Systems, helping students understand that everything is a system and it connects to everything, which is why we went shallow and then later before showcase, I allowed the students to go deeper into what they were interested in. Use of context. Local, 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 local. They will care more if they can see it around them and if they know that it's relevant to them. Keep everything local. Yes, that still means that you can compare fires happening here to fires happening in Australia, or watershed issues happening here to watershed issues happening in Florida or California. But keep your main focus on what's happening in their community, environment, what's happening with their issues, as well as the history. Experiences are a set of activities over time. So being intentional, being systematic, reflecting on them, and managing the time well. Manage your time so you're not rushed. Make every activity intentional so the students know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Systematic, routines and procedures, routines and procedures. And then allow time for reflection and connection of the instruction material and how that relates to the experience they just had. The best experience you can give students is an authentic audience who work in the field that you are studying. So this was the best part, I think, about the whole entire year. I had people coming in left and right from different areas of fields. I had people coming in talking about E. coli. I had people coming in talking about Lake Sturgeon and about forestry. We had our local forester there, and they really enjoy it. They love being in front of kids, and they love teaching what they know. And this information and this experience that you're going to give your kids by bringing in people is more than what you could ever teach them yourself. And that was a huge thing that I had to get over in my mind. And I'm so happy that I did, because it was the most amazing experience, not only for me, but also for my students. Learn. So how do you learn about all these things? How do you get PD? Where do you go for that PD? Attending PD and workshops, talking to other teachers, get out and talk to your state organizations, reach out to parents. If you know a parent that's a marine biologist, talk to them, ask them if they'll come in. If you know a parent who works at the power plant, ask them to come in. Keep an eye out for activities, articles, experiences on Twitter. Twitter is a great resource for that. Even if you just type in science teacher in the search bar, you'll get amazing resources, as well as the National Science Teacher Association. So here are some wonderful organization and resources, which hopefully over the next couple of days, you will get to meet some of these people and hear different presentations from these people. Groundswell was an amazing, they are amazing people who give amazing opportunities and get you connected to the right people. So I definitely highly recommend that if you are wondering like, hey, how do I get more resources about this topic? Get in touch with Joanna, Jessica, Mara, anyone who works for Groundswell, and they will be able to connect you to the right people. So my question to you is how can I support you in creating meaningful watershed experiences for your students? So please make sure, sorry about that. So please reach out to me. My contact information is right here. So my email is there. And if you email me, we can always have a phone conversation or a Zoom call if you would like. Please, 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 if you ever have a question about anything, or if you needed clarification or wanted some more information based on a piece of this presentation, please let me know, and I will be more than happy to meet you in your classroom. You can come into my classroom. You can come see what we're doing in environmental science at Coopersville. Whatever you need, I am here to support you in any way that I can. So I'm very anxious to hear your questions, and I will do my best to give answers the best I can. Again, feel free to email me at any time if questions pop up.